Hello, I'm Jillian. Welcome to our Flower Color Guide Summer Challenge. This has been incredibly fun, not just to do, but also to see your art at the end of all of these tutorials. Now, I'm really excited to jump into the second blue flower that we have today. We are going to be painting the Larkspur flower, and if you have been painting along with us, don't forget to use the hashtag Flower Color Guide Summer Challenge so that we can see your work and also cheer you on. If you are new to my channel, my name is Jillian. I'm a full-time watercolor artist who wants to show you how to embrace the mess and magic of watercolor. Let's jump into the supplies that I will be using. All of the supplies are linked in the description below. I encourage you to use the supplies that you already own and have, and hopefully this is going to help you to build your relationship with watercolor. Welcome back. Today is day 8. We are going to be painting the Larkspur flower. Now this flower is basically a nice 5-petal flower kind of shape or structure. So keeping that in mind, we're going to be using my 1/2-inch flat brush to create some of these shapes. I'm going to be picking up a slightly darker blue so that it does not clash with the scarbosa, which we have already painted in the last episode. Now what I'm doing is I'm holding my brush pretty high up and I'm trying to just get some really loose petal marks. I'm not trying to create too much detail at this point. What I'm really doing is just creating the outside shape of the flower. You can see that from the reference photo, the flowers are overlapping one another. So to create some of those overlap, I am varying the color value and the color hue as well. So what I mean by color hue is that I'm also adding in a tad of mineral violet to darken the color. I'm also adding in complementary colors to my blue to make sure that I get a slightly muted or a darker shade. Now the blue that I'm using currently is Ultramarine Deep by Holbein. You can use whatever blue that you can find in your palette. While the painting is still wet, this is where I would go in and add in darker color values. You can see that this is how you get nice soft blends and bleeds. At this point in time, when you're looking at the painting, it really just looks like blobs of flower petals because there's no real definition as yet. I want you to just let go of the first layer because the first layer, sometimes we attach so much effort and pressure on it, and I want you to use the opportunity to see the first layer as your ugly beginning. I call it the ugly beginning because you don't really have much definition, and sometimes it can be very frustrating because we have visualized something else in our mind, and for us to step forward and try and bridge that to creating something with more meaning and more depth can feel like quite a hurdle. So the first layer tends to be just a roadmap for all of those big shapes. I'm going in with my small size 6 round brush, drawing in these lines. These lines are how I'm defining and differentiating one flower from the next because I can see that so many of them are blobs. So this is a way that you can do to define the various flowers from one another. This is the same strategy that you would use to define petals when you want to define one petal from the other as well. Now I also am exploring creating more of these flowers, so I am going down and you can see that I'm basically going at a diagonal, slowly moving from the top down. I've also created some flowers with a lot lighter color value just so that it shows where the light is falling on these petals. Now I want to encourage you to use different parts of your brush. Use the side, use the tip, use the belly because this is going to give you different floral shapes. You can even consider changing up the shape of your brush. So try a filbert brush, try a round brush, and see what kind of petal shapes that you get, because I find that with more variety, just like how I'm using a reference photo, you don't start to paint the same shape over and over again in your painting. You get a whole variety, and that's exactly what you want. Now, because I'm painting around the scabosa flower that we had painted in the previous episode, I'm also adding some of those Larkspur flowers that are in slightly darker saturation. So you can see that they are a lot more intense in saturation, and this is to provide that contrast so that the scabosa flower actually stands out in front. And then you got the Larkspur flower kind of hanging out at the back. Now I'm done with my first layer of flowers, finished mapping out some of those shapes, and what I'm going in doing is starting to add the details. Now the interesting thing is that when I started out this painting, I was telling myself that I was just going to make it really loose and I was not going to define very much, but because some of these blobs were so close to one another, I started to have the urge to define them and separate each one. So this is where you can see me drawing some of those lines to differentiate one flower shape from the next. I'm also starting to showcase one or two petals in each of these flowers, so you don't have to define every single thing, because otherwise sometimes we get lost in the details. And this is where, when you're painting loosely, it is up to you to decide what exactly you want to feature and what exactly you want the viewer to fill in the gaps. This is the magic of loose florals. So I run a membership where on a monthly basis I've got floral classes, and one of the biggest questions that my members are always asking me is all about layering, finding how exactly to project depth in your work without overworking it. And one of the tips that I have provided is always to think about looking at your reference photo and asking yourself where that light source is, because your light source is going to determine where the lights and the darks are. Your darks would be your shadows. So what I'm painting when I'm painting the dark parts are essentially painting the shadows. And where I'm painting the light parts are essentially where I'm assuming the light is hitting on the flower. So these are questions for you to reflect on when you're looking at your reference photo. And this also means that you need to really sit down and take the time to look at your reference photo before you start painting. Honestly, I love these questions because they also help me to reflect on the way in which I paint and my practice. If you're interested to find out more about this membership, I've got a waitlist down in the description below that you can click on. Hey, how's things going? I want you to just take a step back from your painting and take a look at where it's at right now, because this is usually a time where we find that we might be adding too many details. So I'm hoping that this little reminder is just to help you to take a step back from your painting and appreciate where it is at right now. Painting is 100% dry at this stage. It means that all of those layers that I add in and colors, they essentially are your wet in dry technique. I'm just layering on top of it, and that's also called glazing. When you do that, you're actually increasing the saturation and color value of that existing layer, and this is what helps to bring out that depth. Now, I would encourage you to also soften some of your lines by adding water to them. So when you add water to a line that you have put down and you start to soften or dilute that color, what happens is that you get a very nice blend. As I'm adding in my leaves, one thing that I started to notice is that everything is in a medium tone. So think about the various color value tones your entire painting has, so that this creates more cohesiveness. And what I mean by that is that you need your light tones, your mid tones, and your dark tones in a painting. So right now at this stage, I felt like my greens were not getting enough dark tones, so I've started to add a slightly darker color value and hue with regard to my leaves. These are actually chrome oxide green that I have mixed in some of that blue color mixture. Now, if you take a look at the entire painting as a whole now, you can see that even though we had some pretty purpley looking colors, the blues kind of add a contrast and a pop, and I really like how they all go together. There is that cohesiveness. Choosing your colors in your painting is such an important skill to have, and thinking about the color temperatures, because this is going to help you to create cohesiveness in your painting. Now in the Larkspur, one thing I saw was that they've got these really small little white looking buds, so I'm going to be capturing some of that in my painting. You can see that when I'm creating those small tiny white buds, I'm literally just using some dirty water from my cup and I'm just putting it down. I want to remind you that this tutorial is 12 minutes long. However, this painting took 50 minutes to do, 50. And this means to say that your painting is going to take time to develop and shape. So many of the time, we don't have time to sit through a full tutorial where it's 1 hour. And I also know that it's a lot of time commitment for so many of us, which is why many of my videos are slightly more sped up. And even at that sped up speed, this is actually ×2, you can still see that I still am working pretty slowly. So take your time to give yourself all of that space to slowly, whether it's to define the petals or to add leaves, enjoy the process and the painting before it eventually takes shape. It has been such a privilege to paint with you today. Let's meet again where we are going to be adding to this composition, and we are going to be adding the forget-me-not flowers. I'll see you in the next video.